Yes, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Adapt Performance Podcast. So we've got a little bit of a banging episode for you today. I am chuffed to do this one. I woke up with this idea and I thought, right, I'm going to roll with it. But before we get into that, we released our conditioning guide last week, okay, and the feedback from it so far has been absolutely mental. Like we're really chuffed with the feedback. Essentially, just to give you a quick rundown on what we're going to be covering in that is, okay, we're going to talk to you a little bit around some of the adaptations that you can get from conditioning. It's not just going out on a run. There are certain central and peripheral adaptations that we're going to explain. We're also going to get into the idea of anaerobic, anaerobic. I said the same thing twice there, aerobic and anaerobic. In relation to power and capacity and how you can structure things. And then we also give you some 6-week free programs that basically outline how you can actually train for those specific things. And then we also cover a little bit of Q&A of some general questions that we get asked in relation to conditioning. So I've placed a link for that in the show notes below. So go grab it. It's free. Put your email in. You'll get it straight away. Download it. It's yours for forever. Lifetime access. So go do it because I have a sneaky suspicion we might start to charge for this soon because the feedback's been sick. But yeah, so in terms of today's podcast episode, then what we're going to be getting into is I recently turned the big 3-0. I know I don't look it, appreciate that. Thank you very much. But I have, which means I've been training 15 years. And in that time, we've done a lot of training, done a lot of different training programs. I've made my own. I've followed some of the more famous ones to the T. And I've recently spoke about all the three that I'm going to be speaking about today. So I just thought, right, let's do a podcast episode out of that and see how we get on. I've written a few notes on some of the things that I definitely want to cover. However, I am just going to kind of freestyle it a little bit and see where we end up. There is going to be an element of me just talking around my experiences, a little bit of the science, a little bit of the application, and where that actually fits within, an athletic population. If that's you, or if you are generally just somebody who loves to strength train, then we're definitely going to get into that as well. Okay, so the first one we're going to get into is German volume training, and this method of training was popularized by a guy called Charles Poliquin, who was probably one of my early inspirations in S&C and strength training. He used to publish quite a lot. He is no longer alive, but he was super popular back in the day. He used to write a lot for like T Nation. He then had his own website, and I would say probably one of the figureheads in strength and conditioning when I was kind of coming through. And I think as research has kind of moved forward, I think a lot of his claims are now being debunked as absolute whoppers, actually. But equally, that's always going to happen. I think as times evolve and people get a little bit more of an understanding over things, I think people point the bullshit finger a little bit. But if you've not seen a picture of Charles Poliquin, look at his arms because they're absolutely massive. The big old things, and there's probably a decent amount of steroid use in there as well, although I don't think he ever actually owned up to it. So German volume training then, let's get into this. I started doing this pretty early on. It will have been when I was 16, and I think I've done it a few times, 16 and 17. This was currently when I was training MMA, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, stand-up, all that type of thing. And the reason I started doing this is I was reading a little bit about it, but was also kind of, I think there's two reasons. There was one, I was kind of stuck in a little bit of a weight class issue, I guess you could say. Like I didn't particularly feel strong or big in my current weight class. I just didn't feel like I really belonged there. So I was like, okay, I'll try and climb a little bit. And I'd had a few of my coaches at the time that said, okay, well, why do you get on sort of a powerlifting or a bodybuilding style program? Probably not the best advice, to be honest with you, but we live and we learn. And the second bit is, my early inspirations around like lifting weights is when Geordie Shore was about. And if anybody is similar age to me and knows what Geordie Shore is, it's just a bunch of lads and girls from Newcastle that just used to go out drinking all the time, but they're all shredded. And that was definitely an early inspiration to me, regardless. So getting into the actual German volume training side of things then, what it is and, how it actually went, essentially is a 5-day cycle. Okay. So day 1, you train chest and back. Day 2, you train legs and abs. Day 3 is a rest day. Day 4 is arms and shoulders. and then day 5 is off. Okay. And just kind of put this into perspective, this is very much around building muscle. It is not something I would consider as a athletic development style program. Obviously, if you're trying to go for hypertrophy and that fits into the overall athletic picture, then okay, it is an athletic development program. However, it's quite one dimensional. Um, it is 10 sets of 10. Okay. So on every exercise, or at least the main exercises of the session, you do 10 sets of 10 reps with 60 seconds rest in between each. And you do it at 60% of your 1 rep max. It is a high volume program. Okay. And, just to give you an idea of how they actually wrote it originally, or, Charles Poliquin popularized it, is chest and back. So you would superset these. Okay. And I think it was bench press, 10 reps. You then have a little bit of rest, go into your back exercise, which was a row, 10 reps at 60%, and then you rest a little bit longer and you repeat that. Okay. So you go back to back to back. And there's also like an accessory exercise after that, which I think might have been pull-ups and pec flies, okay, which you do 3 sets of 12 with, which is quite ambitious for a pull-up, to be fair, particularly after doing, all the previous work. Legs, you would squat, and it'd be a lying hamstring curl. And then the abs section was, I don't know, a hanging knee raise and some calves. Again, you do 3 sets of 12 for the accessories. The arms and shoulders was a standing barbell bicep curl and a tricep dip. Add weights to the tricep dips if you could. And then the shoulders was rear delts and lateral raises with dumbbells. Same thing, okay? And yeah, it was tough, and I think it definitely felt like there was a huge pump component to it for sure, because like the first couple of sets relatively easy, but then it hots up really quickly because of the reduced rest time. Like you are really accumulating a lot of waste products in the muscles, which means that you're not able to always complete them. Okay, like you will end up in a situation where you fail a few sets, and so you're pushing towards failure. Okay, so kind of one of the mechanisms, or one of the things that we think are important for muscle gain. So we're getting an element of mechanical tension, but I guess some of the criticisms of this is the mechanical tension piece, where the movement velocity, the ability for your muscles to contract concentrically really slows down as you approach failure. That is happening later on in the session, so that might happen, set 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., in which case you've already accumulated a few sets of fatigue, where you're not necessarily stimulating all of the muscle fibers and the high threshold motor units that you want to, okay, in which case you might not be getting the most out of the work that you've been doing. So yeah, that's what it is. Gym and volume training. There's been a few studies that are I think one study actually that I remember is comparing like 10 sets of 10 versus 5 sets of 10. And I think what they basically said is like the 5 sets of 10 actually it attributes like a similar amount of muscle growth. And research isn't perfect, and I definitely have to go looking through that with a fine tooth comb to decide on whether I believe it. What I did think about it actually was it was really good for technique. You're getting a lot of reps in at a decent weight, 60%. It's not super heavy, but it's enough where you can really kind of dial things in. And yeah, and I found that, to be fair, I think my squats got really good. Um, I think looking back on it, like I've always been quite a good tricep dipper, even at like a young age. So I think I did my 10 sets of 10 at like 27 to 35 kilo. I've got a notebook with it. I'll find it actually, but it was always like a pretty decent weight. And I think my training in my early years, 16, 17, is it's kind of stuck with me in a lot of ways. Those gains haven't left as much. So yeah, I think really good for technique. I think there was a big pump component to it. Very GPP style of things. I think this could be potentially an okay block that could set up a future strength block, maybe. Did I gain size? I think the caveat to all of this is I think so, but I'm not actually too sure. I was at a stage where I wasn't really tracking things too well, and equally, I might have just gained size anyway. I wasn't really eating much because of like the element of combat sports, and there's definitely a little bit of what's the word, like disordered eating around things. Like I don't think young fighters necessarily have the best relationship with food. But okay, so I think those were some good things, actually. I do think I gained a little bit. I got a big pump. I enjoyed training. Like I was just like a man on a mission. I was just buzzing for it. So I think there's a lot of utility there. I also have this experience now of doing that program, so I can recommend it a little bit more. Um, some of the downsides to it is I got sore as shit. I was honestly, I think the first few weeks of doing this, because it's like I think it's a 6 cycle of doing that. So you repeat that 5 day cycle, 5 or 6 times, and then you take a little bit of time off, and then you go again, but a slightly heavier weight, reduced rep range. I think you go 10 sets of 6. But that's not as really popularized. Like I don't think people ever really make it to that point, if I'm honest with you. Yeah, I was super sore. And that kind of leads on to the next point of like it wasn't great to do alongside sport in any way, shape, or form. Okay, it's a bad idea because like my skill practice really kind of started to suffer. Like I definitely picked up a few injuries as a result of it, so that wasn't ideal in any way. um so yeah, I think, was it worth it? It's difficult. I wouldn't take it back because I really did enjoy it. Like it was a good program to go through, and it just takes away a lot of the thinking. So if you're somebody that doesn't like programming for themselves, doesn't want to get a coach, and you're just like, I want to do something, I want to do a program, experience it, and see what happens, then yeah, give it a whirl and see what you actually find. I don't think people experiment enough, but actually experiment with purpose, because there will be a lesson learned at the end of it, whether you develop an injury or some tendinopathy, or whether you actually gain a little bit of size and it challenges some of your programming decisions. I think it's a really good thing to do. Doesn't need to be 10 sets of 10, however. Right, so that's kind of my first one. That was the first big program that I kind of followed, that wasn't from myself, because I've always written a lot of my own programs as well. So, second one then is actually looking at the conjugate style of things, or the Westside Barbell style of things. And this is popularized by Louis Simmons, who I guess is like the head coach at Westside Barbell, who's also an athlete. And they are a powerlifting club. Okay. And I think they're one of the best powerlifting clubs in the world. If you attribute like some of the world records and, total amount of wins and the amount of weight lifted. So powerlifting, bench, squat, deadlift, they compete in raw. So where you can wear a belt and knee sleeves, and they also compete in equipped, which is basically where you can wear a deadlift suit, you can wear a bench suit, or bench shirt, sorry, and you can also wear like squat briefs, which essentially those are all super tight compression garments that essentially give you a little bit of oomph and pull you into the positions of fully being locked out. Um, I've not worn them, so I can't comment on equipped lifting. However, I've heard that it is absolutely dreadful to get into them. Like it just pinches you, and it's just not fun. But you do lift a lot heavier weight, because it essentially supports you in that. Okay, so in terms of Conjugate or Westside and their style of programming, essentially what it is you do 2 max effort days per week and 2 dynamic effort days per week. Okay. So, for example, Monday, you might do a max effort lower body day. Okay. So, max effort meaning we are going to push it. So, we're going to do a 1 rep max all the way through to a 5 rep max. Okay. Depending on what we're trying to do on that day. And we would do that in one key variation. So, that might be a squat, or it might be a deadlift variation. And then you'll do a couple of accessories afterwards. Okay. And those accessories are going to be specific to your weaknesses. Okay. So highlighting when you do your 1 rep max, when you're on the platform, where do you fail? Is it your lower back strength? Is it glutes? Is it hamstrings? Whatever. Okay. And that definitely takes a little bit of a coaching eye, actually, to be able to look at somebody's movement and think, okay, if we get this stronger, that will, influence their squat in a positive way. So that's a max effort squat, and then that's the max effort lower body, sorry, and then the max effort upper body is it's all going to be around bench press. Okay, it'll be a style of press. It'll be a floor press, a bench press with pause. It might be a board, it might be bands, it might be whatever. Okay, and then you have 2 days that they call dynamic effort. Okay, so essentially moving with speed, and they do a little bit of like waves. Okay, so you might do 3 reps, 2 reps, 1 rep, and then recycle back through. And the way they generally do it is they will use bands and chains on their dynamic effort as well as their max effort, actually. But they definitely tended to do it on the dynamic effort days as a way of forcing speed throughout the range of motion. So exploding off your chest in a bench press and really trying to lock out fast. if you haven't used bands or chains before, give them a go. Like it really does get you to think about extending quickly, and complete the full range of motion with speed and intent. Because naturally speaking, we will always try and decelerate towards the end of the range of motion. So if you're bench pressing towards the end, that's when you are the most biomechanically efficient. So a lot of people are not going to miss a lift in that last centimeter of the exercise. We actually start to down regulate a little bit of the force quality, so we don't do it as much. That's where bands and chains can really help. So yeah, the dynamic effort is essentially their speed day. Okay, so they have 2 heavy days, 2 speed days, and what you basically see there is they're working on the force velocity curve. Okay, so one of the kind of key principles that we might think about in strength and conditioning is the idea of do something super heavy, do something super fast, and then generally do something in the middle. And that is the way we're going to create a well-rounded athlete that can do a variety of things. So yeah, they're using that. As one of the cornerstone pieces of how they're trying to create the strongest human beings possible. Okay, and just to touch on a few other key elements of what they do. When we start looking at the max effort stuff, okay, so the max effort lower body and the max effort upper body, I know they really value the rest time side of things. Okay, so we're thinking about trying to add a kilo to the bar from the last time that we did this specific variation. Okay, so we're going to make sure that it's kind of like we need to hit this thing, like the whole room's around you, you're screaming, like they've got sniffing salts, like they're going for it. They make sure that rest time is their friend, and they're making sure that they are fully rested and recovered cardiovascularly, central nervous system wise. They feel like they're ready to go, they're amped for it. I think that's something that we could all learn, actually, is really prioritizing rest time and making sure that we're not rushing things to the point where we are getting a subpar adaptation. Okay, because if you're not able to give 100% when you should be giving 100%, then those 98% efforts are really going to start to add up. And I think over the months and over the years, that is going to influence the gains that you are making. So yeah, rest time is something there. The other side of that actually is they seem to really prioritize that on the max effort. However, when you go to their dynamic effort days and they're doing 9 sets of 3 or 9 sets of 2 on a 45-second clock, I'm not 100%, and without kind of getting into the nitty gritty of how they got to that point, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I would also try and prioritize rest when it comes to the speed work in order to get the most out of it. Okay, but yeah, so just some thoughts there. Another cornerstone piece of that is like the idea of accommodating resistance. So they're using bands and chains. Spoke about that before, but that adds into the idea of they speak about, or Louis speaks about, the law of accommodation, which is essentially a rule that he speaks about as the more and more you apply the same stimulus to the body, it will start to adapt slower and eventually will no longer adapt to that same stimulus. So they use variation. So they will use a 3 rep max squat. They will use a 2 rep max banded squat. They will use a 1 rep max box squat, and then they'll cycle through. There is probably, when you start thinking about a 1 rep max all the way through to a 5 rep max, and thinking about different amounts of band tension, different amounts of chain tension, different amounts of box heights, different barbells that you can use. So they might use a safety bar squat, they might use a buffalo bar, they might use. There is so many different options there. So they may cycle through this, and that's just squat. And what they did used to do actually is cycle. So on week 1, they would do a squat variation as their max effort. Week 2, they would do a deadlift variation. So they would only hit a heavy squat or deadlift every second week. And these guys are super strong, definitely steroid users. That is a big part of what they are. They shift like 1,000 pounds. Okay, so like 500 kilo type of weights. So they used to alternate between those because they're both like heavily spinally loaded exercises. Okay, so they used to do it in order to give themselves an opportunity to recover. But yeah, so they used to use variation as their friend, to make sure that the law of accommodation didn't slow down their progress. And that kind of goes a little bit opposite to the way that we would program things most of the time. At least how I program is I like to keep things pretty regular. Okay, in order to make adaptations, in order to know what is the stimulus I am doing and how is the body going to react to that, particularly when you start layering on top sport. Okay, because the last thing you want to do is play around with a new variation that you haven't done before at a crazy heavy weight, pay the price for it, get injured, get super sore, and then go have to sprint. It doesn't really work for me. That I don't. I see how it could, but I think there's a lot of things you'd need to manage. Okay, so that's not my style. Um, and then the final bit is getting into this idea of, look, they focus on weak points in part of their accessories, and I love that. It's that is strength and conditioning in a lot of ways. We want to make sure that you don't have any holes in your game that are inevitably going to be exploited either by the opposition, okay, from a skill standpoint, technical, tactical, but also, you being a mover and an athlete biomechanically. And yeah, we just don't want weaknesses really, because if you've got weaknesses and you take a bad step, you sprint, okay, and something goes because it is the weak link in the chain, that's not great. So we want to try and bring that up, and that's what we do. That is inevitably, like, when we do strength and conditioning, that's how we structure things. At least that's how I kind of think about it. So yeah, they attack their variations. So I did this, okay. I did conjugate and I did West Side style for about a year and a half. Okay, so I was definitely trying to get a little bit bigger, and I was definitely trying to get stronger. I leaned into powerlifting, even though I never actually competed in powerlifting. I just competed in strongman. I lent into that as my method of trying to get strong, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed the variation actually. Um, from a coaching standpoint, it was probably the most important because it gave me an opportunity to actually experiment with, okay, I'm going to do a floor press with a 2 second pause at the bottom and bands. I'm then going to be able to play around with a deficit deadlift with, a pause at the knee. Like, it just gave me an opportunity to look at some of the key, the king exercises, squat, bench, and deadlift. That's, how people kind of speak about them, and get really good technically, develop my coaching eye, and also understand, like, okay, if I am going to do a deficit deadlift or I am going to do a box squat, what actually does that feel like, and what are the benefits I get from that, um, from a strength uh, perspective. And did it work? You know what? I don't know. Like, it seems mad to me looking at this. I did get stronger. Okay, that's a lie. My deadlift got stronger. My squat got stronger. I can't really remember about my bench. And to give you some ideas of, like, my numbers at the time, like, I was probably a 210 kilo deadlifter. Actually, I can remember hitting a 210 kilo deadlift from a deficit of, like, stood on a 25 plate. So yeah, I think it might have been closer to like 225 maybe, let's say. Bench press wise, I was probably like 145, and then squat wise, I was probably like a 180 to 190 squatter. Okay, so well trained, strong. Not the strongest, but definitely putting some weight to get to that point. I don't know if I actually got too much stronger from a bench press standpoint. I think some of the criticisms of conjugate actually is around the idea that it doesn't always work for natural lifters. So if you are not somebody that is super compensating through chemical use or abuse, then it doesn't seem to work. I don't know if I necessarily just think put it down to that one thing. Um, but yeah, I did really enjoy it. I wouldn't use it for athletes as it's written from a West Side standpoint. However, I think it does a really good job of actually filling in a lot of the gaps that other powerlifting or bodybuilding style programs miss. Like I said, force velocity curve, do something fast, do something super heavy, do a little bit in the middle ground, work on your weak points, use variation to, one, keep you interested, or to just keep the progress rolling. I think there's a lot of benefit there, and I'm definitely not saying do it as it's written. However, look at your own training programs and start thinking, okay, there's probably elements of that in there anyway. So yeah, that's conjugate, and that's West Side from Louis Simmons. Yeah, and I do really look back on that style of training fondly, or at least that training phase, and think, okay, that was cool. Right, give me a second. I'm just going to have a drink. Sipping from the Beavertown pint glass, which our local pub was kind enough to lend me. Right, so moving on to the final one I'm going to speak through is Smolov Jr. So speaking about this one, because Sammy Graham, Grady Graham, who one of my good mates who works at GB Boxing, S&C coach there, he's currently going through the full. He's just started it actually, going through the full cycle. So he basically got, I don't know if it's called Smolov Senior or just Smolov. So I'll talk about Smolov Senior, let's say, first, and then I'll talk through what I actually did. So Smolov is a motherfucker of a program, actually. designed by a guy called Sergey Smolov, a Russian bloke who I think his nickname was the Russian Master of Sports, which is quite a title. And the idea with Smolov is it's super high frequency, high volume, and high load. So it's a lot, and it's split up into 4 phases over 13 weeks. And yeah, you smash the fuck out of one or two variations, usually a squat and a bench press. Okay. And if you do the full 4 phases, the reports are, and this is, on things like T Nation and some of the websites and stuff, is that, you could gain anywhere from 22 kilo to 58 kilo on a variation, which sounds massive. And it is big, and I think there's a lot that goes into this, like your prior training history, how well you stick to the program, how well you rest, what other stuff you're doing. Are you in a calorie deficit versus, a surplus, or just maintaining? Do you sleep well? There's a lot of other factors that always go into this stuff. However, yeah, they claim big things. I've not done the senior. The gym I used to train at, a few of the guys tried it a few times. So I know one guy in particular, he's called Guy actually. I know he said that he's tried it 3 times, failed twice before his body started to break down, and inevitably, picked up a few injuries that just meant he couldn't lift the weight, so he just couldn't do the program. So yeah, that is Smolov. Okay, what I did is I did Smolov Junior, which is like a baby version of it, and essentially it is 4 days per week. I've done it for both a squat and a bench press at separate times. Okay, and when I first did the squat, it took me from a 150 squat, 1 rep max, to a 160. Okay, so in 4 weeks, I got 10 kilo on my 1 rep max. Okay, and the way it works is you basically do 3 weeks of the program, deload for a week, and then retest your 1 rep max. The idea being, okay, I'll give you let's say, for example, we'll go with a bench press number. Let's say my 1 rep max is 100 kilo. Okay. On day one, you do 6 sets of 6 reps at 70%, so 70 kilo. On day two, which would be a Wednesday, okay, so miss a day, you would do 7 sets of 5 at 75%, so 75 kilo, miss a day. So then we go on to Friday, you do 8 sets of 4 at 80%. Then you go again the next day. So you've got a back-to-back day there. And the last day is 10 sets of 3 reps at 85%. Okay. So highish volume, that's typically higher than what a lot of people would program, like 6 sets of 6. I think 5x5 is generally the highest I would go if I was going to write a program for myself or somebody else. And yeah, this chap is programming 10 sets of 3 at a decent percentage, 85%. That's going to catch up with you. So 4 days per week. And essentially, after each week, you add 5 or 10 kilo, depending on how it feels. But they want to see that you progress week to week. You do that for 3 weeks, you deload, you go again. So yeah, like I said, I gained 10 kilo on my squats. So I went from 150 to 160. I think the second time I did it, I was at 165, and I went to 175. Okay, so I got 10 kilo both times. When I did the bench press, I think I got 7.5 kilo, and I think it was a 127, and I think it took me to a 135. Yeah. So in terms of this, then, what you need to be aware of is just completing it. Like I really do think the magic is just getting through it. The way you're going to fail this is if you don't complete it. That's it. So I think you need to kind of factor in calorie deficit versus maintenance, all that type of thing. Like your actual lifestyle really matters here, and you need to take care of your body. I would do limited accessories. Okay, if you're going to do it for your squat, maybe do some hamstring curl work. Maybe do some mobility just to keep yourself feeling good. Do a little bit of core if you want to do a little bit of core. Do some isometric style stuff just to keep your tendons healthy, and then just back off and just let the squat do the work. I think if you try an RDL, if you try and deadlift, if you try and do anything too much, you're going to fuck yourself up and you're not going to be able to complete it, which is going to be sad. So yeah, I think limited accessories, and that goes for upper body as well. Your elbows are going to take a pasting. That is what I noticed is, like, I was in pain. Like my knees felt absolutely shite. My elbows didn't feel good. Shoulders were fine, actually. Yeah, they survived. I think The other benefit to this is skill level. You're going to get really good at the exercises, particularly this one, because you're getting like a lot of work at 70% and above. Like you're going to become really, really efficient at squatting or bench pressing, which is where I feel like a big amount of the actual benefit is actually just from a skill level, like intermuscular coordination of being able to, synchronize muscles at the right time. You start to find your groove. You start to know where your foot pressure needs to be, when you breathe, when you need to push past, when you need to be fast, all those things. Okay. And essentially what it is like an overreaching cycle. Okay. You're going to be digging deep. Like I wish I could track some of the metrics I would associate as being like good to track now. So your sleep, your mood, your soreness. If I had a whoop or a heart rate, something like that, I'd love to see what happens over that phase, or even tracking something like jumps, actually, like a counter movement jump every day, or drop jump, just so I could get some measure of like neuromuscular fatigue. That'd be cool. I'd be really interested to see, because sometimes you turn up to the gym. I can remember the second week, um, turning up to do my 10 sets of 3 after I just did 8 sets of 4. And this was a squat day in particular. I can remember thinking, fuck this, like the bar, like 20 kilo bar felt so heavy. Um, but okay, looking back on it, did I enjoy it? Yes. It was like a really good gut check for me. I was like, okay, right, it's you've got to work hard, and it kind of pushed me a little bit past the point of what I thought I could do, actually. So that was really cool. Um, I lost that strength pretty soon after stopping squatting 4 times a week, actually. Like, I think maintaining that level of volume and frequency was important in order to keep in the adaptations. So I'm curious when Sammy does this, like whether he manages to keep it around for long. And obviously, there's a few things that go into that, like does he do enough work to maintain that strength quality before dropping off? So, yeah, I lost that strength, actually. So I wonder if there's something there. Um, I actually got bigger as well. Actually, from looking at this, I can remember my legs felt massive doing the squat stuff. And when we look at like some of the current research around, like it depends how you want to think about hypertrophy, but getting 5 stimulating reps. Okay, so if you're going to do a 5 rep max, then every single one of those reps are going to stimulate some form of hypertrophy. Whereas the more and more you get away from like a 5 rep max, the less and less all of those reps are going to stimulate, muscle gain. Well, we look at a program like this, and I think you're getting a lot of stimulating reps. You're getting a lot of effective reps that are going to push you towards, gaining size. So yeah, I liked it. Would I recommend doing this for sport? Fuck no. To be honest with you, I think you're really going to have to try and manage things really well in order to make this work. And I think the more you layer on, like a manual labor job, or like excessive amounts of coaching, I think you're going to start to struggle. It's tough. I actually did this when I was still kickboxing. Okay, again, off kind of some advice that you would benefit from being stronger. Okay, took that idea and did Smolov Junior. Um, so yeah, right. There's some thoughts like, and I think reflecting on all of these, I'm really happy that I've tried around with different programs, because I think you learn a lot. And I think like my own coaching style now is probably a product of all these programs, and some ones that I haven't spoke about before as well. Like I've done some sprinting programs that were fully written. I've done some more kind of powerlifting programs, done a lot of bodybuilding style work. Like I think this is very much like rooted in, my biases and how I want to approach getting somebody the adaptation they want. Um, yeah. So if anybody has any questions on anything I've kind of covered there, I know I just kind of waffled. There probably wasn't too much like actual takeaways other than me just speaking through some training programs that I've done and, really enjoyed. Just a reminder, go get the conditioning guide. It is in the show notes below. Go get it, give it a read. It'll take you 10 to 15 minutes. And I think you will be smarter at the end of it. And then just drop us a question if you've got any, questions about the content. It was really interesting. I was trying to, because it was me and Joe that wrote it, and Joe did a lot of the heavy lifting with it as well. It's difficult trying to figure out how much work you want to put into an ebook that you don't want it to be huge. You don't want it to be 400 pages. So you need to pick and choose some of the stuff that you're just not going to speak about, and some of the stuff that you are going to speak about and you think are important. And also doing it in a written format. So yeah, it was a really good challenge. We really enjoyed it, and I think you'll get something from it, and hopefully just go and put that into your programs, and I think you'll see the benefit. I think conditioning is one of the underappreciated elements of strength and conditioning for sure. And that definitely goes into my own biases back in the day as well, and that's definitely changed. But yeah, cool. Right. If you've got any questions, give us a shout. Thank you very much for listening. Cheers, guys.